And now, friends, on Talksport and Talk Radio, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt described the day of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, December the 7th, 1941, as a date which will live in infamy. That phrase was revived 20 years ago tomorrow, the 11th of September 2001. It was 9/11.
In the neighborhood closest to the World Trade Center, it is an eerie sight, the financial district, a virtual ghost town. Already sanitation crews are moving in to clear away our changed skyline.
It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare.
William French of Linden, New Jersey was coming up the PATH train escalator to go to work when the first plane hit. He got out in time, but his world changed forever.
It's not going to be the same. It's not going to be the same. It's not going to be the same for me.
Across the city, everyone gathered around TVs and radios for the latest news. Eddie Johnson watched from where he works, a parking garage on Leonard Street in the Village.
Terrible. It's terrible. I never thought this would happen. I watched those buildings being built and see them coming down like that and all the people running from this area. It's terrible.
Then I saw this plane flying at a very low altitude and an extremely fast speed that zoomed past us. And then I saw the plane aim and crash into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Every first responder, firefighters, police officers, EMTs and paramedics, every one of them saw the burning towers. And even though this is our job, they made a personal decision to go into danger. Because we all knew we were going to the most dangerous fire of our lives.
Interestingly, Hugh, there is one report on one news agency quoting a U.S. official saying that they believe that these attacks were linked to a group that had ties to Osama bin Laden, of course, public enemy number one for the United States. Absolutely no confirmation of that from any other U.S. officials or other agencies. And I think you have to say that at this moment the United States security services are in a state of disarray, because what people are already beginning to ask is how come, with all of the United States sophisticated intelligence law enforcement agencies knowing about the potential terrorist threats, why was none of this detected? Why was none of it anticipated?
Death from above, death from the blue skies. Almost 3,000 deaths, but for some of the families of the deceased, the murdered, no answers, 20 years on. And those unanswered questions are at the heart of a fascinating new book by David Gardner called 9/11, The Conspiracy Theories. And David Gardner joins us now on the eve of the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Good morning, David. Thanks for doing this for us. Congratulations on the book. Now, it's very easy to disappear down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories, but your book doesn't do that at all. I think your book, despite the title, outlines the conspiracy theories, but deals more with the unanswered questions. And there are an amazing number of huge unanswered questions, mainly about the lack of frankness from the US intelligence services about that dreadful day.
Yeah, that was the thing that surprised me most, to be honest with you. You know, I started looking at the conspiracy theories, and what I found out was that, I mean, there were a lot of unexplained questions about 9/11 that for many of us, but what I didn't really think was that the actual family members of almost all of those nearly 3,000 people that died, plus the survivors, they didn't really know what happened either. And they're involved in a lawsuit, the biggest in US history. Most representatives of most of those families are involved in this lawsuit, basically trying to find out what happened all this time later.
Now, at the heart of this confusion seems to be a commission, the 9/11 Commission, which is meant to explain these things. Like the Warren Commission and John F. Kennedy's assassination, it only served to muddy the waters. Cutting to the heart of your book, is it your sense that the CIA in particular are trying to protect themselves from accusations they didn't share information with, say, the FBI, and they're responsible for these attacks?
Well, yeah, that's the heart of it, really. I mean, there are some crazy theories. I mean, you may well have heard some of them. I mean, the most extreme, I guess, is the fact, and this is a conspiracy theory that's shared by a lot of people, actually, is that the US government was actually behind the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. You know, that somehow they wanted to trigger a kind of war in the Middle East, and that was the way they're doing it. I mean, that frankly, to me, seems too far-fetched to think that would happen. What I do think happened, and is continued to happen, is that it's a massive cover-up, really, because I have spoken to some FBI agents who were working at the time. One particular guy, a guy called Mark Rossini, who's not working for them now, who he was actually working as an FBI liaison with the CIA at the time of just before 9/11, and he and some colleagues saw a CIA cable that said that two of the hijackers that were later to be to aim a hijack plane at one of the Twin Towers, they were actually in California 18 months before 9/11.
Yeah.
And the sense was that Mark has, and a lot of people in the intelligence community has, is that the CIA wanted to run their own operation to follow these guys, see what happened, and perhaps what they thought were small fish.
And try and turn them almost, make them double agents almost.
Exactly. Yep. Turn them, certainly try that, follow them, watch them, keep tabs on them, see where they went, see who they led them to. And the feeling is, and you see, had the CIA told the FBI officially that they knew these people in the country, the FBI has the authority to investigate domestic terrorism, domestic crime. So they would have, well, almost certainly have picked them up. They wouldn't have let them run. They would have felt the danger's too great, and they would have acted. Whereas the CIA, an intelligence operation, they wanted to gather intelligence on them. And effectively, and what happened, of course, if that was indeed what happened, it was an intelligence operation that went disastrously wrong. And that could have reflected horribly, not only on the intelligence services, but also on President Bush, who was only in his first year in office. The sense is, by a lot of people in the intelligence community, that this cover-up started on 9/11 and has carried on to this day, because there's an awful lot of unclassified information, really, that there's no reason why it shouldn't be public, but it remains secret to this day.
Well, the book's called 9/11 and Conspiracy Theories, folks, published by John Blake Publishing. The author David Gardner is our special guest this morning on the eve of 9/11. The other thing the book's got is plenty of haunting, heartbreaking, harrowing photographs, but one very revealing photograph of the 19 perpetrators of the 3 hijacks, 15 of whom, of course, are from Saudi Arabia. 15 of them, and yet the focus ever since then has been on Afghanistan and Pakistan, and we know that Osama bin Laden's family and relatives were allowed out on practically the only flight to leave America after 9/11. I mean, there's a huge, murky nest of questions lurking right there, David.
Well, yeah, and in fact, the lawsuit I mentioned earlier, that is actually targeting Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
So I mean, again, but Saudi has said very little about what part it may have played in this whole thing. The families are mixed. I mean, some of them think that Saudi Arabia played a direct role somehow in the planning of the attacks. I've been told that it's more likely that they were actually working with the U.S. intelligence services on this kind of botched operation to kind of follow them through the country and see what happened. But of course, like the CIA, like the U.S. intelligence, they've kept that to themselves, because that, by revealing what perhaps really happened, their role in this whole thing, could be very damaging to the US and to the Saudis themselves.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, quite often we're told, and maybe there's some truth in it, you may endanger other undercover officers, other embedded agents, you may endanger a kind of counter-terrorism operation. 20 years on, that isn't the case. This can only be surely about face-saving by departments and governments, and even, in the case of Saudi Arabia, a whole country.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's no other way to look at it. And there's some very bitter families who lost their loved ones, in the most horrific circumstances. Surely they deserve to know what happened. They deserve the truth. They deserve to be told everything about what happened there. Even perhaps if the wider public isn't. But I mean, of all people, they suffered losses of husbands, children, fathers, mothers, and yet to think that they still don't really know what led up to it, and they're still being stymied in many directions. You mentioned the 9/11 Commission. A lot of the families had great hopes for the commission. They thought that was the answer. They pressed for it. They pushed for it. They finally President Bush finally commissioned it. And frankly, they feel now it was a whitewash. They learned nothing new. It was just a way of kind of painting a story, creating a narrative that really satisfied nobody. And I think, a lot of things that happen in history, they fill the newspapers up. We get a narrative that happened at the time. But things, as you rightly say, 20 years later, there were different priorities. And I think one of the biggest priorities really right now is to tell the truth to the people who lost their loved ones there.
Now, I think we all remember, if of an age, exactly where we were when we first heard this news, first saw these images broadcast flashed across the world. I certainly do. But the one thing that passed me by at the time, and I read your book, I must say, David, first time at a single sitting, I then kind of dipped back through various bits of it, and the bit that's really stayed with me, I'm looking at it now, is about the mysterious collapse of World Trade Center Building Number 7. It wasn't hit by any planes. It was supposedly set ablaze by flames from the neighbouring towers. And it's the building collapse, and I remember this really well, that the BBC reported before it actually happened. I mean, that is an absolutely chilling fact, which seems to have been glossed over in the ensuing decades.
It is. I mean, frankly, I would imagine if you asked most people in the street if they knew that a third tower collapsed, I suspect many people would say they probably didn't. I mean, it was reported at the time, but most people probably forgot that fact. It was 370 feet away from the towers. It wasn't hit by any plane. Supposedly, it was hit by some of the falling debris, created fires, which then created the collapse of this huge building. And that is, again, there's a whole other conspiracy theory about what happened to the Twin Towers and about building number 7. And some conspiracy theories are wackos. They've got all kind of strange and weird. And
I mean, you've got a photograph in the book of this collapsed building. That is no wacko conspiracy theory. No. That is hard, terrifying fact.
Yeah, and these people actually who are claiming this could not have happened through the planes hitting the World Trade Center. They're sort of pretty serious people. These are architects and engineers, thousands of them actually, who joined a group together, architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. They put their reputation on the line. They're basically saying it was impossible for that to happen, and they suggest that explosives were placed within the Twin Towers and within building number 7, which caused the collapse. I mean, they have very persuasive theories about how that would have happened, scientific theories. I mean, and that you have to take it seriously. I mean, it gets more difficult when you ask about the motivation.
Yeah, well, that's the thing I want to ask you, because I know a lot of police officers around the world at a more basic level, investigating a crime, ask the old Latin question, cui bono, who benefits? Who's going to benefit from this? It's difficult to think who's going to benefit from an atrocity on this level, except, of course, unless it's a kind of concentration of focus of more cock-up than conspiracy. A lot of kind of an imperfect storm, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, if you're thinking about government's involvement, to think that any government would create or actually be in favour of a terrible incident like this that would kill so many people, you can't believe that. But maybe if it was supposed to happen in a much smaller way, I don't know. That really doesn't work with me, actually, because I mean, there are out there conspiracy theories who say it didn't happen at all. I mean, you ask the families of people that lost people, it happened. There's no doubt about that.
Absolutely. And the other thing that, I mean, again, there are rumours, counter-rumours, but we heard reports immediately afterwards, and they've not gone away, that, several of the larger businesses, for example, in the Twin Towers, key players cancelled very important meetings on the morning of those airplane strikes. What do you make of that, of those allegations and assertions?
Well, you have that, yeah. I mean, again, these are more of the questions I was looking at. I mean, equally, there's movements in the money market in the days before. There's American Airlines and Delta shares going up, being bought before the crashes. And you look at the movements in money at the stock markets, and you think it looks very suspicious. It doesn't look like it looks like people knew what was happening before it happened. Again. There are still so many questions all this time later, and so many people asking different kind of questions about what happened.
I mean, the book's a fascinating read. How long has this taken you, David, to put together? Because you've done interviews for it, you've brought all this information together. I would say, folks, it's absolutely not a conspiracy theorist's book. It focuses on some conspiracy theories, but it's mainly about these unanswered questions and this kind of wall of secrecy around the information. How long did it take you, David?
I mean, I was in New York at the time. We had an office just up from where it happened in Soho. I wasn't actually in New York when it happened. We had an office there. I was in LA at the time, but I was in America, and I reported on the actual story at the time, and I followed it closely ever since, and I've written many stories for newspapers and magazines since. And over the last couple of years, really, I have been focusing on the conspiracy theories particularly. I mean, the idea was to look at them and try and understand where they came from, how much veracity to give them, and then try and kind of put them all in perspective, really, and fish out the ones that I believed were worth exploring further. And then what I tried to do is try and speak to individuals who were affected and try and, a cross section of who, some of the people from the law enforcement, some of the families who are involved, some of the survivors, some of the conspiracy theorists themselves, and try and put together a real picture of where we're at, basically. And that's what surprised me most. This is history, but it's still changing. It's still happening right now, all this time later.
It's hidden history as well, and the book, folks, takes us right the way up and through the assassination by American forces of Osama bin Laden. There are even questions about that as well, and about this kind of murky link between the various intelligence services, this Pakistan intelligence service and the CIA. And I suppose it's that old story, isn't it? When you sup with the devil, use a very long spoon. All these people seem to be up to it, to their armpits, on whatever side of the political divide you are. They're all kind of linking with each other, swapping information, testing each other out. It's a hideous world you've exposed, David.
Well, yeah, and there's so much self-interest, isn't there? And they're all working to try and keep their own, preserve their own interests. They're all working hand in glove in some ways and against each other in others. It's as you say, it's a very murky world out there, and I think that's what spurs conspiracy theories. To be honest, so much is kept from us. We're allowed so much information, so much. We're kept away from so much else, and obviously, what that does is spur people to try and come up with their own idea of what happened.
Do you think we'll ever know exactly what happened, in the way that we may never know what happened around the murder of John F. Kennedy? Will we ever know about 9/11?
I really don't. I mean, there's one sort of slight bright spot in that the last three presidents, Bush, Obama, Trump, all basically kept material classified. Despite all the pleas from the families, they refused to unclassify them. President Biden has, just in the last few days, said that he would unclassify a lot of material. I mean, it remains to be seen exactly what is made public. But I think families have some hope that perhaps some more details will be released. But, I mean, again, there's so much that I know we won't be told.
Well, those questions are laid out fascinatingly in this book called 9/11, The Conspiracy Theories by David Gardner. The subtitle is The Truth and What's Been Hidden from Us, and this book exposes it brilliantly, peeling back layer after layer of unanswered questions. An absolutely fascinating, almost hypnotic read, published by John Blake. And David Gardner, author of 9/11, The Conspiracy Theories, was our special guest this morning on the eve of 9/11, 20 years on.